And when I was most lonely, that's when I realized I didn't know God. I knew of him. He was my savior, but I didn't have a relationship with him. I wasn't communicating. I wasn't giving him my heart, my feelings. My parents, the one thing I was most grateful for is their emphasis on it's a relationship with Jesus that matters the most and nothing else does. And it wasn't some overnight experience that really changed that. It was just that gradual growth through discipleship. You can only be as spiritually mature as you are emotionally mature. Men pretending to be perfect helps nobody. It actually hurts us. You know, our big motto at that time, and it's a really good slogan for dating, it's, hey, just take it one date at a time. Having a mutual friend who can vouch not just for you, but for your character is always the best way to at least get one date. From there, it's on you. And true relationship is this: you're fully known and fully loved. I love you. I've never met you, but I love you. Carlton does. We'd happily lay our lives down for you. We'd love to talk to you. I'm more convinced now than ever before, because of my life and my story, my journey, and how I feel, that it's not just the right way. This is not what it's about. It's the best way. Like, I cannot tell you how more convinced I am now than at any point in my life and ever before, with like passion in my heart, emotions and feelings. I'm just more convinced now that it's just the Bible way, the Jesus way. It is just the best way.
Before we jump into the episode, I wanted to take a second and thank you for watching the Single Man Podcast. What started as a vision in October 2023 has grown into something more than I ever imagined. If you haven't seen episode 1 yet, I'm only creating 52 episodes, and my goal is to reach as many single men as possible through these real stories. YouTube tells me that only 10% of those who watch the podcast are subscribed. It would tremendously help the podcast reach more men if you would scan the QR code on the screen right now, or click the only link in this episode's description and subscribe on YouTube. Through the link, you can also join our email list, follow us on social media, or even donate so we can keep making an impact in single men's lives. My commitment to you is to use 100% of anything donated to continue improving the quality of the podcast. Thank you from the bottom of my heart. Now, let's roll the episode. Welcome to the Single Man Podcast, where we delve into candid conversations with Christian men about their journey to faith, advice for their younger selves, and navigating dating. With a heart to reach men from all walks of life, dive into real stories of redemption, growth, and the hope found in following Jesus. I'm your host, Carlton French, a 29-year-old single Christian, and I'm excited for you to listen to this week's episode. Let's jump into it. Hey everybody, it's Carlton French. Welcome back to the Single Man Podcast. I am here for our first ever virtual episode with JJ Tomlin. JJ, how are you doing today?
Hey, I'm so excited to be here, and thank you for doing your first virtual exception for me. And next time we can do it in person, okay?
Yeah, I love it. Well, cool story. So JJ runs and helps run a podcast called Heart of Dating for Christian men and women around navigating dating, relationships, singleness. And about a year ago, JJ started coming out with episodes specifically for men, just like one-off episodes as part of the podcast. And it really was encouraging to me because there was no resources that I could find for single Christian men specifically. And so I've been following what you're doing, JJ, and really encouraged by the work that you're doing for the single men that are already Christians. And so when I felt like God gave me the vision to start this podcast, I was like, I'd love to hopefully reach single men that don't know Jesus by having conversations with men who do. And I was like, wow, I literally made a list of people I'd love to have on one day. And I was like, this is like long shot, but JJ Tomlin I had on that list. So we got connected about I guess it was like October timeframe in Nashville, Tennessee at the Think Conference, which is a conference for Christian young adult leaders. And we talked about maybe doing it at your place in Franklin, Tennessee. And that didn't end up working. So we're making it work today virtually.
Let's go. Well, hey, next time you're back in Franklin, happy to do it in person at our studio. And I just want to commend you. Like, I can't believe I'm going to say this, but in 2024, the last thing you'd think you'd need is another podcast. I think we're kind of like on the oversaturated part of the podcast movement.
Yeah.
But here we are, a super needed podcast, man. And it's kind of amazing. And we do those episodes on Fridays because there's just, when I was a single guy, there's nothing for single Christian men specifically, which is pretty wild. So super awesome niche you're in. And Christian or non-Christian guys, man, I'm happy to put myself up on the chopping block, talk about all the mistakes I made as a single guy so that you guys don't have to make those mistakes, and happy to share my experience.
Yeah, amazing. So hopefully the audio is coming through well, and you can also watch on YouTube or Spotify if you're a regular listener and see JJ and I virtually here on our webcams. But and the angle is a little bit different than normal, so apologies for that, everybody that normally listens.
Yeah, just do yourself a favor and zoom in on Carlton. Just you don't want to look at me.
Yeah, love it. Well, for everybody that doesn't know JJ, I'll give a little introduction on him, and then we'll jump into the meat of the conversation. So JJ is 29, and he lives in Franklin, Tennessee. He, kind of like I said earlier, runs a Christian dating, I guess, media organization or platform, or podcasting. Y'all do in-person events, conferences, Zoom calls, things like that. And then I've really been following y'all since I became a Christian 3 years ago, and so I consider y'all like the premier Christian dating podcast in the world that I'm aware of. So really cool. How long ago did you get married, JJ?
That's so awesome, by the way. I did not know that part of your story as well.
Yeah.
We've been married for like 2.5 years, and so got engaged right about the time that you became a Christian. So like as our story kind of started, sort of yours, and so it's kind of been like a side-by-side story, and super awesome, man. I love hearing anytime from guys, that have been impacted, that God has used anything of our story, the good things that we've done, the mistakes that we've made, that have been impactful for you. So I love your desire to serve Christian and non-Christian men. I'm super passionate about serving men, period, especially single men. So yeah, I would say I'm exactly where I feel like God has me, which is the best place to be. I couldn't have dreamed of a better situation. I work 20 hours a week with my wife, which is about the max that we can do before we start fighting on everything. And then the other 20 hours a week, I run my own business where I do consulting for Amazon.
Oh, cool.
And so, yeah, so that's what I love. It's kind of like a blended vocational ministry where I don't take a paycheck from part of dating, and then I kind of pay the bills and put bread on the table with my business on the other 20 hours of the week.
Oh, wow. Okay. That's amazing. I didn't know that. That's cool.
Yeah.
And then hobby wise, I know you're a big golfer. You used to play professional football in Europe. You have a daughter as well, so I'm sure that takes a lot of time.
Yeah, it's the best. My wife and I, we work from home, so we get to see our daughter every day for multiple hours. It's the best. And yeah, love working out, love playing golf. Working out, we get a lifetime 5 days a week at this point, so I kind of have no excuse to get back into shape. So definitely been a little bit more passionate about losing some like COVID fat that's been just hanging around for about 4 years. And so getting shredded, loading up for my winter arc, it's been nice to get back in shape.
Right. I love it. And is that one of your New Year's resolutions, 2025 here now, like getting back in shape? I feel like a lot of people are getting back into the gym.
It's funny. I'm not a big New Year's resolution guy, but if you are, my best tip would be to start early in December and go ahead and get some momentum, especially in like small ways. What I'm thinking about doing for 2025 is I'm really thinking about going back to the flip phone or giving up sugar. I'm kind of like tied between those two. And I think I'm going to do I think I might do a flip phone for 2025.
Oh, wow. I love it. That's a great idea.
So I'm not sure what your favorite one was. I'm thinking about the NV2, the Nokia.
I had that one that like flipped up where you had like the dot, like the text like this, where you could hit all the keys.
The side keyboard. Yeah.
Yeah. I can't remember what that was called.
It might have been the MV or the Voyager. I mean, there's a couple that are the Sidekick maybe. I don't know. That was like the golden age of middle school.
Yeah, me too. Yeah, we're the same age, which is crazy. I'm 29 too. So yeah, that's amazing. Okay, cool. Well, I love it, JJ. We'll have to have you jump into your story, like how you came to know Jesus. Did you grow up in church? At what point did you really understand who he was and what he had done for you specifically?
Yeah, so I was a missionary kid, so definitely grew up around like the faith. I'd say my parents, the one thing I was most grateful for is their emphasis on it's a relationship with Jesus that matters the most and nothing else does. So that was super impactful to kind of how I saw faith. For from the get go, it was never about obeying. Although I grew up evangelical, somewhat legalistic. I do think I'm most grateful for at the end of the day. They emphasize his relationship with Jesus that mattered the most. That being said, I went to a Christian private school as well. So, I mean, I had all the Christian influence you can imagine,
Hmm.
but it wasn't really real for me until I moved at 16 years old and everything was kind of stripped away. This kind of life I curated. And when I was most lonely, that's when I realized I didn't know God. I knew of him, he was my savior, but I didn't have a relationship with him. I wasn't communicating. I wasn't giving him my heart, my feelings. It was just kind of this, spiritual commitment to the guy who's supposed to save me from hell. So I really think my relationship took, I don't know, a transformative turn at 16 years old where I reached out out of deep loneliness in my soul for the first time and really encountered God. And then from there, I'd say from ages 16 to 26, seasons of amazing spiritual growth and then seasons of just God was not really a priority. And, I might have claimed that God was the God of my life, but he was definitely not sitting on the throne of my heart. And I was, addicted to porn, going out, making out with any girl at the bar. Like I definitely had times where let me put it this way, I was a
Yeah.
Christian and believer, but from the people I was hanging out with and what I was doing on a Friday night and Saturday night, there was no difference from my life to my pagan secular friend's life. There was just no difference. Maybe I just didn't curse and drop F-bombs,
Hmm.
and that might have been the only difference. And I wasn't having sex. I was just making out and sleeping in the same bed. So that's why I'm so passionate about what I do now because, on the surface, everything looked like it was glorifying God. But if you peeled back one layer or two layers, man, it stunk. It
Hmm.
really stunk. And it wasn't some overnight experience that really changed that. It was just that gradual growth through discipleship, friendship, mentorship, and being in a healthy community that really did pursue Jesus. And that was who I surrounded myself with until
Yeah.
I really changed.
Yeah. Wow. How old were you when you say you really, I guess, made that change or when that started to happen in your life?
Yeah, I'd say 25, 26,
Okay.
I'd say. And that's just me being more honest. It wasn't like a ton of time before Kate and I got married. I happened in a lot of ways to really my life really got whipped into spiritual formation and shape. Probably in those coming months and years right before she showed up. So
Wow.
super super close timing, and I would say even then emotionally, marriage that first year or two really exposed how spiritually and emotionally immature I still was in so many ways, and that's still where I'm at today.
Yeah. Wow. Yeah. 26 was when I was saved, I would say, or like really understood who Jesus was and what he had done for me. So, wow, that's
Yeah,
cool.
and then
Similarities
there's
in our story.
that totally, but even then, like, encounter and experience with Jesus doesn't equate to maturity with
Oh, yeah.
Jesus as well. There's those growing pains, which are months, years, even a decade for believers that just totally kind of, I don't know, magically get like walked over. And for at least me and my journey as a single man, it wasn't that clean cut.
Yeah. So, what would you say is different about your life now? Maybe people are listening that don't currently have a relationship with Jesus or they didn't grow up in church and understand even who Jesus is. Like, why should someone that doesn't already know Jesus try to pursue a relationship with him based on your story?
Yeah, it's a great question. I would say, number one, I'm not just convincing people that my life is the right way. I think
Hmm.
as Christians and as men and stuff, we get so obsessed with right versus wrong. It's all people see what the Christian life is, us just dying every day to try and live the right life and obey God so that we don't get in trouble. I'm more convinced now than ever before because of my life and my story, my journey, and how I feel that it's not just the right way. This is not what it's about. It's the best way.
Mm.
Like, I cannot tell you how more convinced I am now than at any point in my life and ever before, with like passion in my heart, emotions, and feelings. I'm just more convinced now that it's just the Bible way, the Jesus way. It is just the best way. Like, there is just no better way to live your life. It's just the best way.
Mm. That's awesome. Maybe tangibly you could say like one or two things that are better, like compared to before now. What, like obviously you're married now, you have a daughter, maybe
Yeah.
anything else that comes to mind?
I mean, I'm not even talking about marriage and kid life. Like, that's a great thing to have, and I love and I celebrate and cherish, but it's not even about that. I mean, like, probably number one, I would say emotionally.
Mm.
Emotionally, I was just I was so dead. I was so numb. I was just doom scrolling, having fun. But like every weekend and weeknight was just filled with what can I do to have the most fun possible. And
Yeah.
I'm like Enneagram 7, if you're familiar. I doubled down on fun. I love it. And at the end of the day, I was just having fun. Emotionally, I was so just suppressed to my feelings and emotions. I would say the biggest thing for me is where my journey's taken me is emotionally, I've never felt more alive. I've never felt emotionally more
Mm.
healthy, connected with God, my friends, people, family. I would say if you're a guy and emotionally you're just so dead and suppressed, like that's just something that has just died long ago that you kind of suppress, and you're living this life of just thrills and fun and satisfaction wherever you're finding it. I would just say, man, that's like your heart crying out for, validation, safe space, emotional intimacy, and you're just trying to fill that tank in all the wrong ways. And so, man, it's when you finally get that emotional fulfillment that you just always longed for as a man, that is just so taboo to talk about. I just have never felt more alive in my entire life.
Yeah. Wow. That's amazing. I would love to have you touch on advice you'd give your younger self. Well, let's say you could go back and talk to JJ when he was in his earlier 20s, or even when you were 25, 26, trying to, okay, start to get some community in place, start to get some accountability. What would you go back and tell him knowing what you know now?
Yeah, I think about this all the time, man. Because especially if we're trying to get married and have kids and have a relationship,
Yeah.
the reason why marriage is so hard is because you've never really done true relationship before. So the next question you have to ask is, what's true relationship versus what I have now versus what Carlton has right now? And true relationship is this: you're fully known and fully loved. That's really what it is
Mm.
at the end of the day. And not 99% knowing, not 98% knowing, and kind of love. To be 99% knowing is to be completely unknowing. So, one of my favorite quotes is from JP. Because this is like a semi-Christian, non-Christian podcast, I can say it.
Yeah.
Basically, I'll say 99% is a biatch, but 100% is easy. So you think about like working out habits, like kind of running your life. Um, 99% is actually kind of hard, because you're withholding and sharing, but you're
Mm.
not really doing full relationship. I would say my biggest regret and what I wish I would have done so badly is 18, 20, 22, 24 is just get really good at sharing 100% of who JJ is, what I'm struggling with, what I'm going through, what I'm wondering about, what I'm questioning, and fully
Mm.
expose and submit myself, not just peer to peer, but especially with a mentor, someone who's 10 years, 20, 30 years ahead of me in life, who I completely will submit to. That's really what, the way of Jesus is about. It's kind of that rabbi discipleship sage model where it's like, man, I'm putting myself completely on the chopping block, learning how to get completely vulnerable with someone and
Yeah.
experiencing that feeling of, it's not rejection. That's what our shame, our fear is telling us, is if I share this, I'm going to get rejection. But it's actually the opposite. If I share this is actually true love and relationship. And that's really what I missed out on. So when I got into marriage, I mean, it's the first time you're fully being seen, knowing, vulnerable in the best ways and in the worst ways. And it's a really hard thing to do. So my biggest regret is just missing out on that with especially male friendships, male discipleship.
Mm.
I look back with so much sadness for my relationships that just completely plateaued and fell so short of what they could have been.
Yeah. Wow. Really good. Let's say there's guys listening now that, okay, JJ's kind of making some sense, like maybe in my heart, in my mind, like, okay, it sounds like that would be good for me to have, but I don't have anything like that now. What would be a first step, or maybe what was the first step you took back then to start to try to share fully with people? Because I feel like that could be weird. Like before I was a Christian, I'd be like, well, I don't really have anyone I could do that with, you know? Like,
Exactly. Yeah, exactly, man. Here's a good story. I go to a church now. It's about 300 people. We have banquet
yeah.
tables, and the church feeds us every single week. Okay. You sit at a table for an hour, and then this is my dog. Say hi, Levy. Um, so you
What's your
sit
dog's name?
with each other. This is Levy. Say hi, Levy.
Hey, Lovey.
So come here. You want to be in the podcast? Come here. Okay.
Now everybody's got to
Good
turn on the
girl.
video if you're just on the audio.
Yeah,
Got
she's
JJ's
a
dog
very
on.
good dog. Very, very needy. She likes to sleep like right on my neck every morning. She's a very good dog. So you know what's funny, Carlton, is I go to a church where they basically make it impossible to have a 15, 30-minute, hour-long conversation, make friends, meet people, and then you worship Jesus. You have communion for 15, 20 minutes. You're praying for each other, sharing needs with one another. It's an
Hmm.
amazing church. You should come. Um, What's crazy though is we've had people come for a week, a few weeks, a month, and leave, and their feedback was, I didn't make any friends, which is
uh,
mind blowing, right?
hmm.
Because this is the easiest format I've ever seen, especially in a church setting, to walk in, make connections, and make friendships. And what that really illuminated for me is, the tables at our church guarantee an opportunity to build friendship, to make connection, but they don't guarantee friendship and connection. That's got to be something that you still want at the
Hmm.
end of the day and you want to pursue. And so if you're a guy here and you're listening to this story saying, man, that sounds amazing. Well, if you kind of want it, it's not going to happen.
Hmm.
If you kind of want friendship and connection, you show up in my church, well, you're probably not going to get it. And I can guarantee you, we could have a nice call to action QR code. I could text you my therapist, the heart work I do, and a couple guys in your area who meet every week. And unless you really want it, you're probably not going to follow up and do it. So the
Hmm.
first thing is, if you're buying what Carlton is selling and what I'm selling, number one, you have to really want it for yourself.
Yeah.
You really
Yeah.
have to want it. And then
Hmm.
practical steps from there. If you really want it, you're going to pursue it. You're going to go to passing church. You're going to get plugged in with a couple guys. You're going to try and find, a men's group who does vulnerable conversation really well. And if it doesn't exist, you're not going to make an excuse. You're going to
Hmm.
make it yourself. And that's my best tip is if you can't really find some of these things that you're looking for, make it happen yourself. Like you creating this podcast. There's not a single Christian man's podcast. Guess what? I'm going to start it. There's
Yeah.
not a men's group of guys 25 to 30 years old who are newer to the faith or wanting faith who get vulnerable and talk about their feelings. Guess what? I'm going to start it.
Hmm.
Even if two guys show up the first week, I don't care. I'm going to commit to this long term and build it. And so there's got to be that deep desire and passion to make it happen. And then from there, practical steps would be, going through a church. My top two recommendations would be probably the book Emotionally Healthy Spirituality
Okay.
would be, independent. You can do that, order it off Amazon. And number two, there's a great ministry that I would recommend called Tin Man Ministries. And they specialize in working with heart work, emotional core feelings.
Hmm.
It's a mind-blowing, amazing ministry. I could not recommend more than enough. They have kind of 10-man groups that meet on a weekly basis, kind of think AA, but in a much more awesome, emotionally heart-connected way.
Yeah.
Because I would have laughed at this years ago, kind of like the John Eldridge, Wild at Heart, kind of
Yep.
emotionally connected men's heart kind of conversation. I just kind of thought it was cheesy and cringy and not really until I realized how truly disconnected my heart was from my feelings and my mind and my soul. And man, that is really, I'm so convinced, like, the key is for single men, we got to get our hearts back. Like, we
Mm,
really do. And they are just so deprived and cut off and numb and suppressed from the time that we're 12, 13, 14 years old for a multitude of reasons. We're just a bunch of heartless men running around trying to figure out life,
yeah.
doomed for failure.
Yeah. Wow, really good. I'll get the links for those resources from you afterward, and I'll put them in the description, as well as the links to Heart of Dating and everything that y'all are doing too, JJ. So
Totally. Yeah,
so
absolutely.
so if you're listening, check that out in the description. Now, we'd love to pivot now, JJ, into talking about dating. So we have men come on talk about how they came to faith, advice they give their younger self, and how they're navigating dating and relationships. You being married now with a daughter, um, I guess would love to have you start with how dating was different for you once you actually realized, like, okay, maybe I shouldn't be making out with girls. Maybe I shouldn't be sleeping in the same bed, even though you weren't having sex, like that stage of life. And then into meeting Kate, how did that kind of evolve your dating process?
Yeah, and I love talking about how I did dating wrong because I'm just convinced after being in a small group, being around guys, like, this is much more normal and hidden than we like to talk about.
Mm,
So I'm happy to, like, look at JJ's single life, and I just operate in the assumption that this is not every guy, but this is a lot of guys who are playing church and then also kind of have this double life when it comes to dating.
mm,
So, that's why I'm super passionate about talking about all the wrong ways I did dating. And to summarize that is I dated in a silo. I was going on Hinge, I was asking out girls, and no one knew where I was on a Friday night at 8 o'clock.
mm,
Uh, because I was dating some girl and I was too embarrassed or ashamed to kind of tell a friend. And when you put yourself in that kind of situation, it really is the worst situation we can put ourselves into as men. In a silo, dating with no accountability, no visibility, no foresight, with someone who doesn't really share any mutual friends, so there's no blowback.
mm,
And we can kind of act like an idiot. We can act like a fool. We can really embarrass ourselves, and no one will know about it, right? So I'd say my pivot really came when I started introducing friends into my dating life, visibility into my dating life. Guys knew where I was going on a Friday night. And then two, dating a woman who also, um, from the get-go, I knew had character.
mm,
I think the hard part about dating is both parties have to really want to glorify God. If it's like a one-way kind of thing, you're putting yourself, it's just such a hard situation as a guy. Like, the difference between dating a Kate or a girl who really loved Jesus and then a girl who just had a Christian worldview, but her life was kind of wishy-washy. Man, it put all the pressure on me to say no. It put all the pressure on me to hold boundaries. It put all the pressure on me. And I just don't think that was very wise. And so
mm,
finding a partner who is not just kind of meeting you, but also challenging you and how you date wisely and glorify God. I mean, that is just by far, like, it doesn't get better than that. Because then you're working together towards a common goal and mission. And it's not really about, are we going to get married or not? It's, hey, are we going to lead each other better than we found each other? And are we going to glorify God as we kind of romantically get to know each other in a friendship kind of way? So that's what I would say is what really changed my dating journey is accountability, visibility,
mm.
a lot more communal, and then dating a woman worth her, salt.
Yeah, love it. Would you go on dates and then like text your men's group or friends like, hey, I have a date, or what did that practically look like?
Yeah, honestly, especially when you date a woman worth dating, and especially what I mean by that is in a Christian lens, like wifey material, who's got the character and everything. There's
Mm,
a good chance, honestly, you're so excited for your date, you're going to be telling them on the front end, because you're excited.
yeah.
Uh, but two, yeah, it's just setting yourself up, like, it's just like, what's that quote? You don't fail to, like, your goals, like, you fail to, like, the systems you place beforehand.
Uh,
Like, you put systems in place that don't allow you to fail. A good example is, like, my wife and I have a budget meeting, every 2 weeks. It's on the calendar on Wednesdays. That's creating a system so that on Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday before the meeting, I can't delay it. I can't say anything and change it. I can't, pitter patter and not do it because I have a system in place that won't really allow me to fail. Because that meeting's happening right on
Mm.
Wednesdays. It's a good force function. So it's the same thing in dating. Like set yourself up beforehand because I know if there's one piece of advice that I really could have used is when push comes to shove at 11 o'clock at night, when it comes to making a good decision or a bad decision as a single man, hey, if you have not made that decision ahead of time, you're going to fail. Like
Yeah.
you've made it so hard to say no. A good example is like, hey, if you want to wake up at 5:30 for your new workout regimen, you're not going to make that decision at 5:30 in the morning when you're groggy and you're sleepy. You're making that decision the night before at 10 o'clock when you're shutting off your screens, you're drinking your water, you're putting, yourself to sleep. And that's when you made that decision. You made it beforehand, not at 5:30 in the morning. It's the same thing when it comes to making wise decisions as a single man and dating. Make that decision in iron, in your
Yeah.
heart and soul with people way ahead of time because in the moment when push comes to shove, none of us are that strong. Sometimes the Holy Spirit, literally, it is the Holy Spirit,
Hmm.
intervenes. And for some reason, we have that sobriety to make a wise decision. But other than that, I think we really put ourselves in situations to fail.
Yeah. Love it. So you start dating, you start to like pre-decide, it sounds like, put some systems in place, and then you meet Kate, who's now your wife at some point. How did you meet her and what was that process like?
Yeah, man. Hey, talk about like least expected. I was on a Zoom Galentine's conference call in the middle of COVID on the weekend of Valentine's Day
Huh.
almost 3 years ago. Me and a couple other guys similar to yourself were doing blind dates, 5-minute blind dates in front of there's maybe 500 girls on this call.
Wow.
And so, we do like these kind of fun icebreaker blind date situations. I meet Kate on the pre-call. I definitely think she's beautiful, but that wasn't enough for me to kind of ask out a woman. I really wanted to know their character ahead of time before I asked out women.
Hmm.
At kind of that point in my dating life because I just didn't want to mess up anymore.
Yeah.
Um, and so after my blind date, she's a great sister in Christ. It didn't work out, but they invited the guys to stay on the call and watch Kate talk. And I'm like, well, I'm not about to be the only guy here. So I turned off my camera, changed my name to Emily, and then I watched her share her story and teach for the next, 45 minutes. And I was just blown away. I was very much intrigued, especially with her character and who she was in God. I mean, she was talking about like self-hatred and coming out of abuse and healing in God. So it was not the most lighthearted, fun conversation. But again, I was so attracted to that. And so
Hmm.
I had blue hair and black earrings at the time. I kind of looked a little bit like an idiot, in a lot of ways, but I was just kind of like dressing up nicely to impress girls was the last thing on my mind.
Yeah.
And so when they asked Kate, I told them I was interested in Kate. When they asked her if she'd be interested in going on like a FaceTime virtual date with me, she was dating a couple other guys at a time doing a dating challenge. And she saw my Instagram and said, not really, I'm not really that interested. And they
Hmm.
vouched for my character, just saying, hey, one date, that's it. Like, that's all you have to do. And my wife basically 51%, 49%, said yes versus no. And then now she has my kid. So, we did
Yeah.
long distance dating for a few months. I moved down to Orange County, pursued her in person and we got engaged right about a year later from first meeting.
Wow. Wow. Amazing.
Yeah. So I was very much into her. She was very much not into me. I was super excited to pursue her.
Hmm.
Our big motto at that time, and it's a really good slogan for dating. It's, hey, just take it one date at a time. Just take
Hmm.
it one day. Like God's got this. And it's funny for me that mean, hey, slow down. Like slow down. Like you're way too excited, infatuated, whatever with this girl. Just take it easy, man. And for her, it was actually funny. It was the opposite. It was, hey, I'm not that excited. I'm not that into this guy. Let me just take it one day at a time instead of thinking about marrying this guy and how it's not going to work and just see what I have in front of me. So it's a really good piece of wisdom and advice to tell yourself,
Hmm.
regardless of which end on the spectrum of you're on.
Yeah. No, that's great. So I recently just had a series where I had 4 women come on the podcast and give advice for men. This was episodes 27 to 30 of the podcast. And the kind of theme of that series was women wanting to be asked on dates. And like if you feel led to ask someone out, then to pursue them. So it sounds like you did that a little bit, like you were intrigued by Kate, you got a friend or something like that to put in a good word for you. And
Yeah,
then she initially wasn't a yes, but kind of came around to the idea of it or something like
yeah,
that. Okay.
yeah.
Wow.
I would just say, yeah, having a mutual friend who can vouch not just for you, but for your character
Hmm.
is always the best way to at least get one date. From there, it's on you.
Hmm.
Um, but yeah, when it comes to pursuing women, if you're a guy, I really do think the best method, hands down, the golden one is having a person who knows you on a heart and soul level, who can vouch for your character.
Hmm.
That will get you into the door, kind of like a job interview.
Yeah.
That'll get your application pushed to the top. You'll at least get an interview. It's the same thing with dating. It'll at least get you a first date. So I could not recommend that method enough. That was definitely by far my most successful way of going on dates with quality women who maybe would not have given me a chance at first. And then from the guy perspective, once you see a woman worth pursuing and marrying from the get-go, I'm not talking about infatuation, but
Yeah.
you just have seen her through time and her story and her heart and soul. That part's pretty easy. Your heart is pretty excited and ignited to pursue, a woman worth pursuing.
Yeah. Love it. No, really practical advice. Love it, JJ. Thanks so much. Last question on dating, and we'll start to wrap up. So now being married, having a daughter, looking back, I guess, to when you were single, what has being married and having a child taught you about the importance of that time of being single? And the majority of our listeners are single men. How should they be thinking about their time being single?
Dude, so I think about this a lot. I really think what I said earlier, the best kind of preparation, the wisest thing you could, here's what wisdom is, okay?
Hmm.
Wisdom is the ability to learn without having to go through the pain of the mistake.
Hmm.
So, a really wise guy can listen to information or a lesson and say, man, I really don't want to go through that. Let me do things on the front end so I don't have to go through the pain of them on the back end.
Yep.
My biggest pain point in marriage by far and away is emotional heart work. Like being able to empathetically listen and give my wife safe space, emotionally processing my feelings. I mean, like I was just such a mess that first year of marriage, especially. I had no idea how to communicate my needs. I was a quote dying to myself. Had
Hmm.
no idea how to communicate my needs because I was quote trying to be selfless. Had no idea how to communicate pain, loneliness, sadness. I just withheld all these feelings and emotions, and all it got me was more disconnected, more resentment towards my wife. I had
Hmm.
to forgive her a lot for not being God because she couldn't invisibly see my needs, wishes, feelings, and emotions,
Hmm.
and I just deprived her of so many opportunities to serve me. And then when it comes to having a kid, it's kind of amazing. I had this having a kid really and one of the main catalysts for why I'm doing a lot of the heart work and emotional work I have now is, there's a reason why they tell you at the hospital, don't shake your baby. It's because when it's at 2 a.m. and your baby is rage crying and there's nothing that you can do to stop it, it's amazing the feelings it triggers in your own self. I had no idea I struggled with control. In fact, I had a huge disliking, disdain. I really push back when it comes to control, only to realize that I had control issues myself. I have a really hard time when someone is, due to family of origin or whatever you want to say.
Yeah.
I have a really hard time when people are raging and out of control and I have nothing I can do, to deal with it. So, having a kid really elicits how out of control you are with yourself and your emotions and your feelings. So, man, the biggest thing for me is just I was so disconnected from my heart. I had no idea what feelings, ideas, emotions, what they even were for me, why God gave them to me. I was just so clueless, man. And it really, really killed my marriage, especially that first year. It made it 10 times harder than it should have been. More importantly, I had no idea how to provide safe space and empathy for my wife because
Hmm.
I had never experienced it myself. So how can I give that gift
Right.
of safe space and listening and empathy to my wife if I've never experienced it myself? And the only thing I've had to do is get over it. What do you
Mm,
think I'm going to tell my wife when I feel like she's being dramatic, high maintenance, emotionally going through something that's making her anxious or fearful? I might give her some lip service, but at the end of the day, what do I really believe in my heart and soul? Get over it, because that's what I had to do. And
mm.
so that gift, it's such a gift, man, of being able to emotionally go through your feelings and your heart. That is the best wedding gift you could give your bride one day. And it is the best gift you could give your children one day.
Mm. Wow. Love it, JJ. Thanks so much for being vulnerable and talking about your story and how you came to faith and navigated dating. A lot of great practical tips I know will help both single men that are Christians and single men that are not. Hopefully, it'll be inspiring to them.
Yeah. Well, I'm curious. I mean, you tell me, as a single guy listening to that,
Yeah.
uh, one of my favorite quotes is, "You can only be as spiritually mature as you are emotionally mature." And
Mm.
that for me made a lot of sense, because I grew up around a lot of men who spiritually proclaimed to be very mature, but behind closed doors, I saw emotionally how immature they were. And for me, it just never made sense. I have this guy who claims to know and love Jesus so much and tell everyone about him. And then behind closed doors, this guy's not acting like Jesus,
Mm.
especially when it comes to conflict, stress, anger. This guy looks nothing like the guy I'm reading about in the Bible or heard about. Like, there's no gentleness, kindness, empathy, patience. And so that never really added up. And I really saw the same thing in the mirror. So,
Mm.
the problem is I was never in close enough relationships emotionally with friends and mentorships for those sides to kind of come out like they do in marriage. But I'm
Yeah.
definitely curious, for you, you've been a Christian for 3 years. When I kind of talk about the emotional heart work aspect of your faith, is that a foreign idea? Is that something that you're curious about? Is that something that gets you excited?
Yeah. So I would say 3 years ago, Carlton, I had never had a conversation about my emotions or my feelings. Nobody really knew who I was, you know? Like I had this outside persona and then okay, on the inside it felt like this like black box of who I really was and nobody could know about this. And so over time, over the last 3 years, as I've gotten into community, as I've gotten mentorship, as I've pursued friendship with people, and a lot of it's been like starting things. Like you said, nothing existed. There was no accountability group. Okay, well, I'm gonna start one because people like you, people like the Heart of Dating, are talking about here's what it looks like to be doing it the right way, and here's why. And so having an example of what to almost look up to inspired me. Okay, well, this seems like a better option than what I'm currently living in now. And so it took people even going first in my life too, leading with vulnerability and conversations with me. Like, hey, Carlton, I'm struggling with this. Okay. I thought I was all alone in that. I guess I can share about it too now. And so as I've learned that, I've kind of stepped into more leadership roles where I feel more equipped to have conversations like that. I'm not perfect, and it's been really like a cool almost crash course this last year plus doing the podcast now since March of 2024, having conversations like this with men who are following Jesus about how they came to faith and how they're navigating dating and just learning about how to do it as best as I can. And so I'm not perfect, but yeah, having hard conversations with friends, having hard conversations with family members, I feel like is hopefully going to help prepare me well for, marriage one day and to date well.
Yeah, I love it. Um, I think you have that ability to digest wisdom really well and then act on it. I
Mm.
think the challenge is at least for me as a man, especially a single man, 99% of the time I heard it, but I didn't really listen to it,
Yeah.
and I
Yeah.
didn't really act on it. So I think that's why for me and you, we really have to stress, the pain of not going through it.
Mm.
And, because that's the big thing at the end of the day, broken hearts, rock bottom, and empty pockets. Those three catalysts typically are the biggest catalysts for men to actually act on wisdom and what they know they should be doing.
Yeah. Yeah. And it took me getting to a rock bottom. I share my testimony in episode 3 of the podcast. If you're a newer listener and you haven't seen episode 3 of the Single Man podcast, go back and check that one out. But I get into like, okay, I really hit rock bottom. And it was like, okay, this can't be any worse than what I'm currently doing. So let me try it. And then it was like, whoa,
Yeah.
this is actually the answer.
Amen. Yeah. Hey, listen, and that's for dating, since it's a single man's podcast,
Mm,
by far and away, I had to do things the wrong way multiple times before I decided to do it the right way and the best
mm,
way and humble myself. That was my biggest mistake, was just my arrogance and pride to go out and date like I knew what I was doing when I had no idea what I was doing. I went out and dated at 24 for the first time ever, really. And I had no clue what I was doing. And so that killed me. But
yeah.
I love your story. I love how you share vulnerably. It's the best thing we can do as men. Pretending
Mm,
to be perfect helps nobody. It
yeah.
actually hurts us,
Mm.
and so that's why I love what you do, man.
Yeah, thanks so much, JJ. Yeah, right back at you. So, last question, we'll wrap up with this. So, I ask everybody this that comes on, and this second half of the podcast, I'm specifically asking, what's one thing you'd want single men that don't already know Jesus, who have just listened to this whole episode? Maybe a friend sent it to them, somehow it popped up on their social media feed on YouTube. They sat through the whole conversation. What's one thing that someone that doesn't know Jesus you'd want them to take away?
Well, number one, I'm proud of you for being here. Like, I love the fact that you're hungry enough and humble enough to listen to information.
Mm,
Uh, so that's amazing. You're already like halfway there. Number two is probably just what I'd share is I love you. I've never met you, but I love you. Carlton does. We'd
mm,
happily lay our lives down for you. We'd love to talk to you. But most importantly, man, um, I'm so sorry for how your life has gone the way it's gone and all the negative ways. Um, if you do want to try the best way to live and just try it,
mm.
I can tell you from my life, this has been the best way I've ever lived my life. And
Yeah.
emotionally, and my soul, and my mind, and my heart, I've never been more alive, more seen, more safe, more connected, just more convinced that this is the way. Like it is the best way.
Mm,
Um, and so that those feelings of peace, the feelings of being known and connected, emotionally seen, and having relationship, that loneliness that you feel, man, like there's a reason why you have it. God gave that to you, and it's your heart like shouting out like I need something better than what I have. And I just say, man, the way of Jesus is that way that your heart and soul is longing for.
mm. Wow. Yeah, I can 100% agree. So if you're listening and would love to have you reach out to me through the podcast on Instagram, the Single Man Podcast. JJ, I'll put his Instagram as well if you're okay with that, JJ. People reaching out to you. And
100%.
yeah, I really appreciate everybody tuning into this conversation. JJ, thanks so much for being the very first virtual conversation on the podcast. And just excited for the future of what's to come. Really great
Thank you, bro.
to spend the time with you today.
Blessings to you, man.
Awesome. Thanks everybody so much for tuning in. If you enjoyed this episode, would love for you to text it to a friend you think would benefit from hearing JJ's story. Tell them, hey, check out this episode of the Single Man Podcast with JJ Tomlin. Check out the links in the description, and we'll be back next week with a new episode. Have a great rest of your Friday. Thanks for listening to this week's episode of the Single Man Podcast. If someone you know would benefit from this week's episode, I'd love for you to text them the link and invite them to listen. You never know how a simple invitation could change someone's life. We'll be back next Friday at noon Eastern, 9 a.m. Pacific, with a new episode. Until then, check out the video version of the podcast on YouTube, and you can engage with us on Instagram, TikTok, and Facebook.